For one of our neighbouring countries, less than a day to go before around 6 million registered voters are going to be going to the polls over in Zimbabwe. Many saying it is now just down to two main candidates as well. Let's remind you who they are. The incumbent president, it's Emmerson Mnangagwa, is seeking a second term in office. Supporters of his main rival, that's Nelson Chamisa, are crying foul already, saying that police have disturbed their campaigns. Unfortunately, if you read back to the history of Zimbabwe, that is not particularly surprising. But to answer the question of what can we expect this time round, I'm joined by Professor of African Politics at UNISA, Kealeboga Maphunye, making time this morning for me. Prof, good to have you on eNCA. We'll talk about how this should be run as an election with international observers. Let's start with the obvious question, though. Is this going to be free and fair to your mind? Good morning.
Good morning, Gareth. Is this going to be free and fair? And thank you for inviting me. It's a big question that everybody is asking at this moment. The same question was asked in 2018 and in 2013. So it's a very difficult question to answer. On the one hand, we expect a very tension-filled election, but on the other, we expect Zimbabweans to vote peacefully like they did on election day in 2018 without any violence. The big issue here, Gareth, is that probably much damage has been done in the run-up to tomorrow. By that I mean the opposition parties are already crying foul, saying that they were denied, spaces, opportunities to campaign, and there have been pockets of violence here and there, with police clamping down on, some of the prospective voters of the opposition, and people generally who wanted to express their political, rights in terms of Zimbabwe's constitution. So therein lies, the big question.
That's the big question, because we've heard this in elections past as well. And to the second point I was raising, Prof, that of international observers, do you get a sense that they're able to do their job? Do you get a sense that they're given the free access that they need in order to do their jobs properly, or is it still very managed by the state?
I do get a sense that they are given a fairly, open space to operate. About 150 observers from the European Union were deployed just, day before yesterday, and others were deployed even earlier. But we mustn't also forget domestic observers. These ones are not coming from anywhere, Gareth. They have been in the country for, since the last election. So we also expect much, work from them. The only problem is that, it has been very, very difficult in Zimbabwe space to allow these observers, given the amendment of the legislation, whereby accreditation became difficult. Money for accrediting the observers have also has also been increased, and therein lies another problem that yes, you would like to have observers to come and operate in your space, but then do they have enough does the space allow them to operate in terms of the cost and everything? That is the big question, as that also we have to deal with.
Absolutely, of course. And one of the other big questions is, who do you think is potentially going to walk away with this? Looking at everything you've just cited, Prof, the inability, it seems, from the opposition, they claim they weren't allowed to campaign correctly. Then there's the vote rigging, which we know has been an issue in the past. When there's been appeals, the courts have been accused of being on the side of ZANU-PF. Is there ever going to be an option in your mind where ZANU-PF is no longer in charge of Zimbabwe?
At this stage, it's pretty much pointing towards ZANU-PF, mainly, Gareth, because, incumbents, political parties that are in power at the time of an election, they have so many advantages. We call them advantages of incumbency, which also include having access to state resources and using state resources for electioneering and for campaigning. So the scales are already tipped in favor of ZANU-PF. However, like any election, we normally say that if it's a free and fair election, or an election that at least has a semblance of fairness, it should have this element of surprise, whereby, in spite of the odds, the opposition might actually win. We have seen it happening, in other, parts of the world, whereby the opposition parties were written off just before an election, and yet they were able to spin a win, in spite of the difficulties that they faced. So not sure whether this will happen in Zimbabwe, but, like I'm saying, this is an election and we just have to go in there with open minds. It's actually in the hands of the Zimbabwean voters tomorrow, not me and you, Gareth.
No, it certainly it is. And of course, we have to wait for the results to come out, and hopefully there's no violence on voting day and during counting as well. Let's not forget the counting has often been marred with violence in the past. In your mind, Professor, as I say goodbye to you, last question then, who would be better for Zimbabwe at the moment, knowing all the international sanctions, knowing how the economy is in the ground, knowing how the citizens of the country are suffering? Who do you think would be a better president? Would it still be Emmerson Mnangagwa, or would it be Nelson Chamisa? Would it be time for change, do you think?
It's a very difficult question for me to answer. It's up to the Zimbabweans, because both candidates, in my view, have got both pros and cons that, would be able to channel the country in one way, direction or the other internationally if one of them won. So it's a very difficult, call to make. But as scholars, as researchers, we look at different, opportunities and disadvantages that each candidate has before deciding that it's going to be Mnangagwa or it's going to be Chamisa. At this stage, like I said, because of the benefits of incumbency, I would say that probably it will go towards Mnangagwa. But it's very difficult. It depends on the voters tomorrow and how the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself will manage the process and how the tally and the counting will be done. Because after the voting, we still have to wait at least about 4 or 5 days while the counting goes on before we expect the results to be released. And the disputes, by the way, we also have to wait for the dispute resolution mechanisms to kick in immediately after the elections, because not only Triple C are worried about the outcome of the election tomorrow. They are already crying foul. But yesterday, another opposition party, MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, were also saying that about 80 of their members, were denied registration and accreditation, and therefore they are going to boycott the election. So we could expect a disputed election this time around if things do not go smoothly tomorrow.